Recording in
Hey guys, Onan here. I wanted to talk about something that is sort of relates to a series of tweets that Essential Catholic was putting over on Twitter, and it's dealing with the dynamic between layperson and priest, and specifically the common sort of recommendation that when someone is struggling with someone or has a spiritual question that they talk to a priest and get a spiritual direction and whatever. And it's um Essential Catholic was pointing out how sort of an unsatisfying response that is, that these kinds of, like, I think, foreseeable, more intellectual issues that people have that aren't really all that individualized are sort of ushered into, well, go into a private session with a priest and can't actually be fleshed out and articulated on the record, so to speak. And the tendency of priests, for better or for worse, to avoid saying out loud what they presumably may say to someone in private confession or private spiritual direction, why that is. And it relates to a conversation or an email exchange I had recently with a priest who's been in contact with me over the course of time about matters that we talk about. And one of the questions that I posed to this priest, who's a parish priest, I said, because it came up on Twitter, and I says, this whole grave reason or grave cause standard that Humanae Vitae articulates, which says, basically says couples may use NFP if they have grave reason to do so. And I'm not so concerned about what constitutes grave reason, but what's not really clear from Humanae Vitae and any of the other church documents is, number one, what duty or what exactly is grave reason accepting you from? Like, it's an exception to the norm. Well, what is the norm? And sort of, and related to that, number two is, for a couple that does not have grave reason, what are they supposed to do? Like, we know if a couple has grave reason, they can use NFP, okay? And that's the way it always gets discussed. But what about someone that doesn't have grave reason? What is that couple supposed to do? And we know that one option, I don't think anyone really disputes this, is one option the couple has is to just be completely continent, completely intimacy free or sex free. Let's say sex free in their marriage. I don't think anyone disputes that is an option a couple has under any circumstances, really. Although I guess arguably one could ask, do you have to have grave reason, depending on what the duty is? If the duty is to procreate, then even complete abstinence seems like should not be undertaken except for grave reason. But setting that aside, what is the alternative? The alternative, presumably, is the couple can continue to be intimate, but what does that look like in a way that's not sinful if they don't have grave cause? In other words, the sex itself, when it happens, looks no different for a couple using NFP versus a couple that is not using NFP but also is not using birth control. Like, when they are intimate, it's the exact same thing. So is it a matter of frequency? What if a couple decides, you know what, we're just always going to abstain from day 6 through 20 of our cycle, more or less the calendar rhythm method. But let's just say they don't really put a lot of thought into it, other than we're going to just always avoid that time period, with the understanding that can um reduce the chances of pregnancy. So is that allowed? And if it's not allowed, what are they supposed to do? Are they morally obligated to have sex during the fertile times? Are they morally obligated to do it with a certain amount of frequency during the fertile times? Like that part is really not discussed anywhere. And it's something I'm very interested in, not so much because I care in a practical level what it looks like, but I think it would help to flesh out what Humani Vitae actually means and how it applies to couples. But so the point of the story is that, so I talked to this priest and I said, Can you answer those questions?" Like, "I'll have to do some research and get back to you." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to research it, but it is sort of mind-boggling to me that a parish priest, an experienced parish priest, wouldn't already know how to answer these questions, because presumably couples, if they're following the standards of the church, are going to may come to the priest with questions about, we're hesitant about having more children. We would like your input as to whether we have grave cause. And let's say they sit down with the priest and decide, no, you really don't have a grave reason here. I would think it would be perfectly appropriate for the couple to say, okay, so what do we need to do? What do we need to do if we can't use NFP and we don't want to be totally continent? What do we need to do so that we're complying with Humani Vitae and we're living a moral life? I would think that would be something a priest ought to be able to answer, and I'm not sure. My suspicion is most priests don't have never really even thought about that question, and it seems like it's an seems to me like a logical thing that the church ought to be able to tell people through priests. And I don't think it's the priest's fault. I don't think anyone has really tried to articulate that and teach them. And so I think that is something that continues to surprise me and concern me a little bit, about how many of these really important moral concepts that Catholic married couples struggle with all the time, it doesn't necessarily seem that there's a uniform system of getting answers to that, and it can come down to the individual instincts and impressions of the priest, who may or may not really be well educated on it or informed himself. And so I think that's a real concern. I think it's something we need to address. And I do that, and I say this for the sake of the priests themselves, because I think they need to be equipped to answer these kinds of questions. And it seems to me like there has not been much effort put in post Humani Vitae to really flesh this out, because the fights are always about, contraception and whether someone has good cause to use NFP, but it really doesn't talk about the rest of the story. And that's something I'm really interested in exploring. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there, just because it was on my mind, and it's kind of germane to some of the discussions we've been having recently. So I appreciate you guys listening. Welcome your comments below, thoughts one way or another. Otherwise, until next time, everyone, have a good one.